Okay, so this is a little intermission, a little extra episode in between the battles. And the reason for this is that for the first time in a very, very long time, probably 5-6 years, I had to not only quickly skim over and read some imperative code, which happens every now and then. I actually had to truly understand what was going on. And I was sitting on a bus and I had about 1500 lines of reasonably complicated JavaScript implementing some fairly intricate algorithms, which meant that I actually had to understand what is going on. And I've been doing functional programming now for 6-7 years, more or less exclusively doing nothing else. And while I still remember a little bit about imperative code, I had forgotten what it actually meant. And it was a refreshing experience, to say the least, to do this. So 1500 lines of code. Usually if I'm given 1500 lines of F#, I would consider that being maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, skim through, read, and I would be done. I would have a good overview over how the code works. Maybe not all the tiniest details, but you know, good enough. So I got this piece of JavaScript and I started looking at it, and it took me 5 hours probably to actually figure out what was going on inside the code. And why was that? And what is the difference? So if I'm given a function in F#, a pure function, let's call it F. And this function, it takes an A and it returns a B. Or we can make it a multivariate and it returns a C and maybe an X, right? So now we have a function of 3 variables producing an X. So the first of all, what I will see is that I know a few things about this function. I know it takes 3 inputs and produces 1 output. That I know for sure. If the person who wrote the code did this work, I also know what these things are, what the definitions of A, B, and C are most likely, and I also know what the result of this thing is, right? There's another thing I know. These are inputs. All of them. And this is the output, right? Another thing I know about this is I know that there is nothing external to this definition of F. Nothing outside of F which can influence this. There's no mutable state somewhere. You can't read files, you can't do anything weird. I know for sure. Which means that whenever I read F, I can just jump into the middle of the code, pick out any function, and I can read it if I need to. Most of the time, actually, it's good enough to see what it takes for what are the inputs and what is the output, because I know. I can go, okay, this takes 2 ints and produces a string. Fine, that's basically all I need to know. And if I need to know more, I can open up this function and I can look inside of it, and it might call other functions. And they all take inputs and produce an output. I don't necessarily need to read those functions, but if I do, I can. But the thing is, I can just go through F deeper through a call graph, which will then return up to here and return the value X. End of story. It's self-contained. I only have to look forward. Only look forward. Now take imperative code, and this is, I'm going to use just JavaScript as an example because it's a particular nasty case, but but this is Python, C#, C, C++, whatever, most of these. Given an F of A, B, and C, what do I know at the outset of this? Well, nothing. I don't know if this thing actually returns anything, like just looking at it. There's no way. Does it? Who knows? Is this an input? I don't know. Is it an output? I have no idea. Is this? Who knows? I have no idea. I don't know anything. It's blank. So the only way for me to know anything about this function, anything at all, is that I actually read this thing. And then it turns out that somewhere over here there's something that it actually modifies. In addition to what's stated up front, there's also this other stuff that is not really mentioned anywhere. So the only way I can know what this function does and understand it is by reading every single line of it very carefully. And I mean very carefully. And this is a little bit like when I talked about map as a way of looping, is that you see map, you know exactly what the input, the structure of the input, and you know exactly the structure of the output, and then it's just a transformation. You don't have to really read any of the details of the stuff. And that's why it's much more efficient than reading a loop where you actually have to read the whole loop. Well, here I have to read the whole function very carefully to know what it does. Here I don't even, like, if the particular details of the implementation aren't important, I don't have to read anything. I know that what it takes and what it produces. I'm happy, I'm fine. Here, I have not the faintest clue what is going on. I need to read every single line of this thing to know what happens, which makes it really, really hard and tedious to understand this code, just for this simple reason. And not to talk about like thread safety and mutable state and jumping around and this and that and so on. It's just really hard to understand this code for this reason. And it's a little bit like, since I'm Finnish, we like forest, right? So this world here is like being dropped into a wild forest, thick wild forest, and and it's overcast. You can't even see the sun. And then your task is to figure out, well, what is the best way of navigating through this forest and all the major features of this forest. And you have nothing to go by. And every now and then there's a little bit of clouds break out and you can see a little bit of sunshine and you can sort of get the direction right and you wander around. But it's a lot of exploring and wandering around to just get this general feel for this forest. Whereas this here, well, you're plopped into a forest, it's full of paths, and moreover, every single path has been marked with a little label where it leads. Now, task. Who is quicker to map out the forest? And that's why this sucks outright and why we shouldn't be doing it. We are wasting time and we are actually not gaining anything. You might say, well, I'm more flexible here because I can do whatever I want. Yeah, exactly. Which means that you have no idea what you're doing or what somebody else is doing. And the code I read actually was written by some really skilled people who had made some very careful considerations how to do everything in a nice, controlled, and also fast way. But still incredibly hard to read. It wasn't bad code. I mean, it was excellent JavaScript, like really top notch. Super professional. So that was the rant for today.